What is up, plant people? Hey, it's time once more for the Planthropology Podcast, the show where we dive into the lives and careers of some very cool plant people to figure out why they do what they do and what keeps them coming back for more. I'm Vikram Baliga, your host and your humble guide in this journey through the sciences. And my friends, as always, I'm so excited to be with you today. Y'all, I have a really great and really interesting one today. I got to interview my friend Brandi Addison, who is a regional agriculture and natural resources reporter for the USA Today Network's West Texas region, which is quite an interesting title. She contributes to a number of media publications, newspapers, different things all over the region and really all over the country. She has her bachelor's in journalism from here at Texas Tech with a minor in environmental science and is about to finish her master's degree in professional writing from NYU, which is so exciting. We talked about that a little bit in the episode, but this is such an interesting take on plants that we haven't had yet. Brandi is an environmentalist. She's a plant lover, an avid gardener. She also just loves talking about the environment. So in this episode, we talked about everything from journalistic integrity to objectivity to how to approach tough topics like climate science and climate change in journalism, especially in regions where that's not something that is talked about a lot, or the audiences may be inherently a little hostile towards it. This was such a fascinating conversation. I learned a ton about good communication and about good writing and the way we put complex scientific ideas out there. So I know you're really going to like this one. This is a fascinating episode that has really nuanced and interesting and creative takes on the way that we talk about everything from plants to climate change and burrows and everything else. So I've got some more information about where you can find Planthropology and where you can find Brandi later. But for now, let's dive into episode 94 of the Planthropology Podcast, Climate Journalism, Objectivity, and Noodle Dome Road with my friend Brandi Addison. Well, Brandi, thanks for coming in this morning. I appreciate that we can finally find time to do this. That's my fault. I'm the worst at scheduling these kinds of things. But how are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so happy it's Friday.
Yeah.
I tend to not talk about what day it is on this podcast a lot because it's supposed to be evergreen content, but it's Friday and I'm happy to tell people that this point in the semester after spring break just makes everyone want to take a nap. Me, my students, everyone else. So
Yeah. So I actually had PTO this entire time from both, I was off from school, I was off from teaching, and I took PTO from journalism as well because I wanted to be able to spend that time with Maddie, right? But also so I could work on my thesis. So coming back, I just came back Tuesday to work, right? And I actually took the week off from teaching beforehand because I just went through a bunch of technology issues.
Yeah.
So, I feel like it's always the toughest to come back from a break like that, right?
Yeah, my brain hasn't gotten back into gear yet. And I feel like I've been from one meeting to the next all week. But I'm so excited to have you in. You do sort of a little bit of a lot of things.
Yeah.
Actually, you do a lot of things. It's not just a little bit. So why don't you introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us about your background. Where are you from? What did you study? Whatever else you want to tell us.
Yeah. So I'm originally from Fort Worth, which I consider the best major city in the U.S. It's not the same in, the way that Dallas or Austin is that you don't feel safe there. You don't feel comfortable there. It is a small town there. No major traffic issues. I love it. And also the Botanic Garden. So I just have to throw that out there.
Which is fantastic.
Yeah, and Brit, right? Brit is just an amazing process. They're working on expanding that even further. I'm really excited about that development. So yes, all that to say, I'm from Fort Worth. And I ended up coming here because I had gotten a lot of scholarships for journalism. I began my career in journalism when I was 15 years old at a local county newspaper, right? And then I continued to freelance through high school for a local startup. And then I made my way out here, right? I had so much experience that I got a lot of scholarships from the journalism department. Mm-hmm. I was actually planning on going to A&M. So,
all right.
Yeah. Which is funny because I always joke with you about how A&M sucks.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I'm I'm loud and proud on that. Right?
My undergrad's from A&M and my bachelor's from A&M, and my parents like to say I'm in recovery. I'm almost there.
Yeah.
Almost there. Yeah.
Well, yeah, so I had always joked, though, that I was never even going to consider Texas Tech, right? That was my thing. Nope, not going to Tech. I'm from Weatherford. I from Fort Worth, moved to Weatherford. Everyone from Weatherford went to Tech. I was not going to be that person.
Uh-huh.
So I went to Tarleton for a semester, right?
Okay.
Because my late uncle lived there at the time. It was the last 6 months he was alive, so I wanted to spend more time with him, right? He had cancer. And after he passed away, I moved home, went to Weatherford College for a semester. And that is how I became an environmentalist, so.
Okay.
So I took environmental science just for the easy credit, like people do horticulture,
Yep.
as you know. And my professor, changed my life. I'm not even kidding. Dr. Addison. She actually went to Texas Tech and was going to be a doctor. And I remember her telling me that she decided that she was going to be an environmental scientist because she was talking with her peers about what their goals were. And everyone wanted to be surgeons or whatnot. And she was like, I just want to go catch bugs, look at all the bugs and snakes in the forest. And they were like, yeah, I don't think you belong here, right? I thought that was hilarious. And that's when she was like, wait, I don't belong here. I belong with something more natural based. I just learned, I remember the biggest, first fact I learned about global warming and the climate crisis was, how our fish are going to be depleted by 2050. And to me, I was like, whoa, that's really soon. This was the first major consideration I took of it. And then we went and, did a bunch of little field trips, to Britt in Fort Worth, did some stuff, hiking at the local river to go test the quality of it. And that is honestly how it started. The next year, I went plant-based for 3 years. I still really don't eat meat. I feel like there's some obligation as an agriculture journalist. So, I do have to, on occasion I do. But yeah, I went vegan. I started listening to Dr. Hayhoe. I really just ramped up my research there, and that's how I got into it. And then, I did my internship at Fort Worth Magazine. I was at the Midland Reporter Telegram as soon as I graduated, which is not a space for environmentalists, right?
In Midland, Texas? Yeah, probably not so much.
No, you know what? I even have my little global weirding, decal out there. So what I did try to do, so I was an education reporter, but I did try to cover, anytime I could, natural resources, right? So when a new solar plant would come out, or not solar plant, but solar farm would come out, I would go to that. Or when there was this hearing for nuclear waste, when they were going to put that storage out in Andrews, I presented the side of Sierra Club, right? We had someone cover it who was a little bit more balanced, and I did commentary because I was a little too close to the subject. So it was an op-ed from me, essentially. And then, I had a baby, wanted to move back to be with my family. Midland's expensive, but also, as you know, it takes a village. So I wanted to be with my family.
Yeah.
COVID hit, but, for those 3 years, nearly 3 years, I was writing for the Dallas Morning News, just covering random stuff and, Frisco and Allen specifically, freelancing for Fort Worth Magazine as well. Freelancing for Fort Worth Magazine. And last year, 2022, right?
Yeah, I don't even know.
What year are we in? 2022. I said my goal is to be a full-time environmental journalist, to cover nature-based issues, full-time green issues. So I reached out to Texas Climate News. I reached out to Green Source DFW. I began covering conservation-based stuff for the Dallas Morning News, pitching those outside of my project that I was committed to daily, which was the DMN Local Project. I started pitching to other departments within the Dallas Morning News and covering prairie land, covering the zoo, covering just various conservation efforts. And I did the same for Fort Worth Magazine. I started covering the longest tenured employee at the Fort Worth Zoo.
Okay.
He focuses on tortoises and iguanas. And so he helped to conserve about 25,000 of them throughout the pandemic, something along those. So I highlighted his efforts, right? So I really ramped up my environmental work there.
Right.
And then I ended up becoming the ag and environmental reporter for the AJ. In June, I did not expect to go back full time, but it worked out, right? So that's how I got here.
Wow. Yeah. So you've been sort of living and breathing journalism for a decade, right? For like most of your life.
Yeah. So what's really funny is I would write stories for my family and read them aloud. And my family knew that I was going to be a writer from that point, like 6 years old. And I remember like my late grandfather now, he would read the Fort Worth Star-Telegram to me in the mornings. And he would show me like, hey, that's a comma. And this is a period, like show me punctuation. And I guess that's really where it rooted, right? Like, I don't know. I've always wanted to be a writer. And, actually sophomore year of high school, my goal was to be a writing instructor or professor at a university. So not a journalist, but like someone who taught writing, which now I have the best of both worlds, right? I'm both of what I wanted to be, a journalist and a professor.
Sure. Yeah, that's super cool. So you're finishing up your master's degree right now. Is that correct?
Yeah.
How's as someone who has done more grad school than is probably healthy for a human brain, how's that been? And you're doing it through NYU, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. So I'm doing an online program. I actually got my class award. They only give one award to a student per each class. And I got it.
Oh, that's cool.
It's called the Professional Writing Impact Award, and my name will be on the slideshow, I believe, at Radio City, maybe
Super
Yankee
cool.
Stadium. Yeah, maybe Yankee Stadium, definitely Radio City, in the little, graduation brochure.
Yeah.
And they said it was specific to my environmental journalism work, and it was unanimous. The faculty voted on it, which I was super excited about. It was actually, I learned that when all my technology was down. So I saw it like 5 days later after I got the email, and I was like, called everybody as soon as I heard. It is great. I am midway through my thesis, which, explores environmental journalism, this shift, how it shifted from essentially like the idea is obviously environmental and journalism, existed way earlier than the 1900s, but it really began to evolve after Silent Spring, right, by Rachel Carson. And it wasn't until the 80s, the 90s that it really became. They shifted from using scientists as sources to political celebrities, right, as sources in the 90s. But I still feel like that was really early within the movement, like 20 years, right, 20, 30 years, and it has increasingly became a polarized issue in journalism, right? So that's basically what it talks about. And, so they also quickly shifted from presenting just the science and data to realizing that, hey, dramatic value really helps people engage with this a lot more. So really like honing in on global warming and how that's impacting residents rather than just like putting out the reports, right?
Sure.
So,
and that's an interesting topic that, I think we probably that a lot of people may not think about is that there is I don't know what the right way to say it, because it doesn't come across the way I want when I say an entertainment value to any kind of writing, journalism or otherwise, right? Like even scientific writing, even journal articles. Like I have read so many journal articles that make me want to go to sleep, right? Like it's just brutal to read. So as we write and as we develop information and communication and everything else, like whether it's a podcast or whether it's written media, we have to figure out like how do we keep readers engaged? How do we drive a message home in a way that is not just factually true? Because that is important. Like we want to be telling the truth
for sure.
But like keeping people moving through it, because people remember things so much better when they're having fun. So in your writing experience, and I'm not just saying this because you're sitting in the room with me, you're a fantastic writer.
Thank you.
I have read a lot of things. I read a lot. I write myself, and you're such a good writer. How have you found in your own work sort of that balance of I want to make sure people want to read this, but I want to make sure that I'm delivering the truth as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do teach long form journalism, and this is something I hit every single class. So first of all, I do remind them, this does not pertain to you because you are not a journalist, but I do remind them that our role as journalists is to serve our community. Like that's the number one role. It's not for notoriety, certainly not for the money, right? Like we all know that we're not getting paid well. But I say our mission, one, is to keep people informed, right? Build this trust within our audience. So, I always go back to when I covered the Midland Odessa shooting, that was 6 months into my career, right? I'm the education reporter. covering a mass shooting at 21 years old, right? This is wild to me. And so I always use that example. I tell them, if we're ever having to cover another one of these, which I imagine most journalists will at this point, I want their communities to know that when they say that the suspect is apprehended, that they can trust them as journalists, right? Like that they know they're safe, right? So one, it's to inform our audience. Two, to ensure our audience is safe, and that they know they're safe. But three, to hold people accountable, right? And I tell them all the time, this should be your main goal, nothing more than that. And so then every other class, I also say, everything you're going to cover is going to be covered by at least a dozen other news organizations. So you can't be matter of fact and succinct, right? I mean, succinct's fine, but matter of fact, no. It's got to be a little bit more nuanced than that. So we have to have that balance. And I tell them every single class from the get-go, you need to be telling a story. So you say entertainment. I say storytelling. I say narrative elements, right? We have to have that narrative element to it because why, and I say, I tell them, basically you're proving them from the lead, from the headline, why yours is better than the others, right?
Okay.
You have to prove from the get-go that there's a reason they need to read yours and not the 12 other, hundreds of other sometimes stories. And it often has to do with the sources and the stories you're telling rather than just the information. So one of my students for her first project did one on inflation. Great topic, but everyone's covering it. So you need to tell the story on why inflation matters, who it's impacting. So so I lay my semester out where they do one assignment on any topic, then they peer at it, and then they cut down that assignment because cutting for clarity, as you know, is a really, really essential thing.
And really challenging.
Talent, right?
Yeah.
And so I make them incorporate my edits and my feedback and do it right. And so then this girl who wrote about inflation, who had a very standard academia-based pretty much paper from the beginning, came in and was like, oh, the lead is now about this college student who is struggling to pay her rent, right? Struggling to buy food. And then she goes into all the information and all the specifics about inflation, right?
Yeah.
So that's something for me. I always tell them, you cannot do matter-of-fact work. You have to tell a story every single time.
Yeah, and I like the way you put it really well of you're building a narrative framework or a narrative structure to the story, and storytelling is important. It's how we pass tradition. It's how we communicate as humans. We are at heart storytellers, and if you look through cultures through time, and I really like how you put that. Just for a sort of a point of clarity, can you for people that may not sort of know some of these distinctions in journalism, what does long form journalism entail? What kinds of things are you going to find and cover in long form journalism?
Yeah. So long form journalism is essentially, it varies by newspaper. So I know that some of the longer stories for the Dallas Morning News was, 700 words or more.
Okay.
But I think the Atlantic is a really great example of long form stories. They have 30,000 word stories.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not reading that. I'm sorry. I can't. I do not have the attention span for that. And that's another reason. So I'm going to cut off real quick and say that's another reason why I stress the importance of storytelling and keeping your readers engaged, right?
Yeah.
Because as we shift to digital journalism more and more, people's attention spans are just shortening.
Sure.
Both of us, our fidgeters are probably, I don't know if you're actually diagnosed with ADHD. I'm not, but I can assume that I have a healthy amount in there, right? So, probably. But, I have a short attention span. I can't sit there and read. So that's why I always tell them, hey, you've got to tell this story. It can't be boring, right? And honestly, on average, you're good if someone makes it a minute and a half, 2 minutes through your story, which if you do the math, I think it's 600 words.
Yeah.
So you're that's good if they make it that far.
Okay.
Most of the time it's 30, 45 seconds.
Okay.
So that's where that storytelling comes in. And that's what makes long form particularly tricky, right? Because the goal of long form is to write long works. So you have to keep people engaged. Long form is just basically longer stories. I give my students general assignment, pick any topic they want, op-ed / review, an immersion assignment, and then an investigative piece.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm pretty flexible there. Just anything long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting. And it's because I'm always curious about in some of our different industries and just areas, like what some of the sort of industry standards and things look like. And it's interesting that it's like 600 words to some of the stuff Ed Yong writes for the Atlantic,
Yeah.
you know, and Ed's a fabulous like science writer, and there's a bunch of others. And I'm a reader, and I even know I read long works and all those things, and I can find myself sometimes sitting down and reading a 10,000 word article. But I even find myself lately, as we have turned everything into bite size, like I call it like the Vine effect, where we started off with 6-second videos of how do you tell a story in 6 seconds, and that's quite a skill. And most of it was like someone falling in a lake or something. But we've kind of, I think, in our pursuit of storytelling, both written and digital, like we've kind of gone through these ebbs and flows of TikTok is 15 seconds. Oh, now TikTok's 30 seconds. Oh, now it's a minute and 3 minutes. Now they're trying to get into the space and compete with YouTube. So you can do like 10-minute videos on TikTok. And then on the other side, YouTube, which was the long form video platform, is doing shorts now. And so we have this big disparity and this big sort of like spread of how we tell stories. And I think that's really an important skill of, one, how do you tell a long story? Because most people aren't doing that right now. Like, stay tuned for part 2. It's like, no, I don't want to. Tell me the rest of it right now. But then how do you also make it as applicable and digestible by people as possible? So that, I think you're doing a good thing teaching your students that of, you may not want to read 30,000 words today. Maybe you want to read 600 in a minute and a half and then go about your day.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, I do stress with them, if it doesn't have a storytelling element, I used to be in the way that I would try to mimic the New York Times, right? Even if it was something as like real estate numbers, like I'm going to use paragraphs, right? And what I hate about the New York Times, I hate to talk about the New York Times, but what I do hate about the New York Times is that their work is not really like often reader friendly. Like you can go look at any of their stories and you can see that they have 50-word sentences in there, which is a lot. That, if you're, in Texas, maybe 40, but still that's a long sentence. In Texas, our grade level is like 4th grade reading, right? So that's what I stress to my students. You don't have to use big words. You don't have to write convoluted sentences, right? The better journalist isn't one who can write these lengthier words, right? That, if you have to go read a dictionary or look up a word in a dictionary to, understand something, that doesn't make you a good journalist. The better journalist, the best journalist is the one who can write for their audience. Yeah. And in Texas, and I can assume it's probably the same in Lubbock, that's a 4th grade reading level. Wow. We have a lot of, people who speak English as a second language around here, right? Yeah. And that's the thing for me. They can't understand the complexities of 40, 50-word sentences, right? Because it just gets confusing at that point. Sometimes even I have to look back and I'm like, what the heck is going on here? Like, I have to read this 4 or 5 times to understand it. Yeah. And I don't like that. That's why I say like short and simple. And even in long form, no one likes clunky paragraphs when they're reading journalism, because that's not what they expect, So for me, I always tell them accessibility in your formatting is important, but also just in your writing. Like, again, we're at a 4th grade reading level. They can't understand some of these words. Like I always tell them, y'all have y'all's bachelor's, right? Or almost have y'all's bachelor's. You need to assume that you do have a higher education than most of your readers. And you need to kind of, that's the biggest thing about journalism, is learning how to present it to your audience. No, the best thing I learned in grad school about writing, I'm not even kidding, was we're going to act like our audience are educated non-experts, right? So and that's a big thing for you with science communications, right? Yeah. You're not sitting here, assuming everybody knows like what I just wrote about. Is it biotic crust? Is that what it is? I just wrote about that yesterday, talking about wild horses, right? And wild bulldogs. Yeah, so I just wrote about that, and we can't assume that everybody knows what that is. So I'm basically like, this is basically a layer that protects our grasslands, right?
Yeah.
And as these wild horses crushed them, like, we could experience more flooding. Like that's basically the best way I can present it, right? But I kept it short and simple, and that's a thing for long form. You still got to keep your works short and simple within them. But also accessibility. If you're using a lot of data, bullet points are your friend. Data tables are your friends, not 5-sentence paragraphs about the data. I hate numbers. I hate reading with numbers. So I'm just saying, it's all about formatting. It's all about being more accessible for your reader.
Yeah, I love that. In all of our communication fields today, and just in general, accessibility and equity in the way that we present information is super important. Super important. That's, I think, a great place to take a quick break. I will record something weird to say to our listeners here in a minute, and then we'll come back. And after the break, I want to talk about some of your experiences teaching, which we've kind of talked about a little bit. I want to talk about some environmental stuff, and then I want you to be able to talk about your new podcast. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited about that. When I say that that readership, the reading time, this one has a really good reading time, like on average, like it's above, somewhere between 3 and 4 minutes. So that means my people are getting through the entire article, which I'm so happy about.
That's pretty awesome. Well, we'll be right back, and then we will cover some more stuff. Well, hey there, everyone. Welcome to the mid-roll. Glad to see you here. Glad you're still with me. I wanted to talk real quick about Brandi's podcast, Weird West Texas. Y'all, it's so much fun. Whether or not you live in my part of the world, in Lubbock in West Texas, it's something I think you can enjoy. It's great storytelling. It has sort of a, investigative journalism, not true crime, but, paranormal, interesting vibe. And I think you'll love it. So consider this the trailer for Weird West Texas. Go put it on your podcast player right now. Aside from that, I'm so glad you're listening to this podcast. You can find Planthropology all the places. I am on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook as Planthropology. That is anthropology with a PL slapped haphazardly right on the front. Look for the green background with the bristlecone pine, and that'll be me. I'm also on the TikTok machine, as long as that lasts, as at the Plant Prof, where you can see my nonsense and hear my words about plants. Thanks so much to the Texas Tech Department of Plant and Soil Science and to the Davis College of Agriculture and Natural Resources for supporting the show and for being a part of it. I actually, today, as I'm recording this mid-roll, got to record an episode with the new dean of our college. It was just so cool that he gave up his time to come be a part of it. I've recorded with our department chair, Dr. Ritchie, before, and you should listen to that episode as well. I think it was like episode 6 in the way back when. And it's just been such a wonderful, supportive experience. So thanks again to Texas Tech and the Department of Plant and Soil Science and the Davis College for the support. Thank you for listening and for being a part of this. If you want to support the show, there's a lot of ways you can do it. You can subscribe. You can follow on social media. You can leave a rating and review anywhere that you can leave ratings and reviews. My favorite color is 5 stars. So if you want to leave me a 5-star review, that would be great. If you've got feedback on the show, if you'd like to hear a specific guest, if you would like to be a guest, shoot me an email at planthropologypod@gmail.com or head over to planthropologypod.com for more information about the show, and you can reach out that way. You can also click on the link for merch and go buy a hat or sticker or t-shirt or whatever, and all of that just goes right back into the show. If you would like to financially support the show, go to buymeacoffee.com/planthropology, and for the price of a coffee, you will keep myself and my staff here at the Texas Tech Greenhouse well caffeinated, and we very much appreciate that. Very much appreciate that. Also, just tell a friend about Planthropology. That would make me happy. If you like it, if you enjoy the show, if you enjoy my nonsense and what we do here, tell your friends about it. Tell your plant people about it. Retweet it on the Twitter machine, or share it to your story on Instagram, or do whatever you can to tell your friends about it. So here in the second half, we talk a lot about journalism and objectivity and integrity and how those things relate to climate science. And it's really such a great conversation. So I hope you stick around, and let's get back into it. Okay, well, we are back. I want to talk about teaching.
Yeah.
Because that is a interesting experience teaching young adults,
Yes.
and college students. So, and you're fairly young yourself, so you have this experience now of teaching people that you're just like a couple years older than, right?
Yeah.
So how did you get into your position as you're an adjunct, correct? Is that so? How did you get into adjuncting? How did that come about?
Yeah. So I have always wanted to teach, as I said.
Yeah.
And, I come from the communications college, and this is something I actually forgot to mention because this is really hilarious. I came here for a transfer visit day in 2016, and I literally left my group tour, to go sit in at the Hub's meeting. So the Hub is one of the student newspapers, right?
Uh-huh.
And that's when I met our assistant dean, Dr. Todd Chambers. And he and I have just clicked ever since. And I told him, hey, I'm moving back to Lubbock. Help a gal out,
Yeah.
I want to teach. And it was literally that simple. Yeah, you have to be an adjunct, you have to have at least half your degree completed at the time, your master's degree completed at the time, at least in ComC. But I think they also took into consideration, man, she's broke a lot of news for the Dallas Morning News the last few years. I was cited in the New York Times and HuffPost for stuff. I think my experience pretty much makes up for the lack of education, right? Especially in journalism. Journalism is one of those fields that I would much rather have a professor that has experience, including modern experience, because this is a field that is constantly shifting, just constantly changing, right? Something new is happening every day.
Yeah.
And so I think that contributed a lot to it. It was just my experience that I have. But also, I'm a Texas Tech fan. I came here. I bleed red and black, so
yeah,
we all bleed red, but I also bleed black.
No, that's awesome. So you teach long form journalism and fairly small class sizes, like what, 8 to 12 students, something like that.
Yeah, I have 16 this semester.
Oh wow, okay.
And I'm teaching principles of journalism for the summer. So
very cool, very cool. So how do you go about? So this is definitely something that's outside of my field. I do all the science communication stuff sort of on the side, and they're like, I guess you can keep doing that. How do you go about designing a course in journalism? I mean, was it something that you had something to work off of as an adjunct? Do you have to come up with everything from scratch? Because I think that a lot of people have maybe interesting conceptions of how classes work on the our side of it, on our side of the lectern.
Yeah, I love that you're talking about journalism. Science never changes, right? Well, as we hit more global warming and stuff, that does, but the science of plants doesn't ever change, right? So with journalism, it's a bit different because, like I said, it is an ever evolving industry. I did go ahead and look at some other long form journalism courses across the nation, look at their syllabus or syllabi, however you want to say it. Fungi versus,
syllabuses.
Yeah. So whatever, however you want to say that. I did go ahead and look at some of those across the nation. And I did include some just big things that I thought needed to be included. We did have a professor before me, so I did use the exact same objectives.
Okay.
But all the lectures I chose on my own, and I only took one assignment, I think, which is the immersion assignment, just because I thought that was a good one. Essentially, my students are assigned a story where they go and go somewhere and immerse themselves into that that place and tell the story of this. So, one student last semester did one on the equestrian team, and what it was like at practice there. One went and did one at Two Ducks on how it was to be a brewmaster, right? So just immersing themselves. Some people, did the homeless shelter. Some did South Plains Food Bank. I'm hoping one of my students managed to do one with Raider Red because I really want that. Cool. I really want that. And I begged some of them to do a day in the life of the rodeo cowboy, but I don't know if that came to fruition.
That would have been cool though.
I've never read a story about a rodeo cowboy. I feel like they are just underappreciated. That they have to be really brave people and have some pretty flamboyant personality to do that.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I want to know what they're doing to get brave enough. But I tried to encourage. So, I did steal that story, or that topic idea, right? Or assignment idea. But, even this semester I have some new stuff from what I had last semester, which was my first semester, right? I added sports journalism because I inevitably, this is Texas Tech. Texas Tech is a sports school.
Yeah, it is.
Half my class wants to be sports journalists at this point. And then I added, because it seemed fitting, layoffs, unions, strikes, and the rise of freelancing as a lecture.
Wow, yeah.
Because everything was happening with the New York Times, with Dallas Morning News. Gannett has gone through 2 rounds of layoffs since I joined in June.
Wow.
So I had to. Fort Worth Star Telegram had 2 or 3 weeks of strikes. And I went to their strike fund, and they finally were able to bargain a fair contract, right? So, I think that we're going to see more and more of this in coming years. So I do want to prepare my students to learn how to freelance.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because that's not something that probably 10 years ago would have ended up on a syllabus, right? And like you said, it's a field that is constantly changing, is very dynamic, and it's cool that you sort of have the leeway and the ability to pivot with both new technologies and new sort of challenges in the field. That's pretty cool.
Absolutely. And, I do have something that, again, wouldn't have been talked about 10 years ago, at least not at Texas Tech or West Texas. But one of my classes is reporting/editing for tone, gender neutrality, and stereotypes. So essentially, and I tell my students, like, some of these are just minor changes. Like, so instead of saying stewardess, we're going to say flight attendant.
Okay.
And we're not going to say boss babe or mom boss, because we don't say dad boss or, whatever.
Yeah.
Something like, we're not going to go ask women how they balance work family life, because you don't ever see articles asking men that, right?
Sure.
And so I tell them, like, okay, first of all, most of the audience is not going to notice if you do incorporate these changes, but if they are part of the populations that you accidentally perpetuate stereotypes by not incorporating them, that's how you're going to lose support, right? So it's just like small changes that basically no one will notice, but if you don't do them, it'll be more noticeable.
Yeah, interesting.
And at the end of the day, I would rather lose support by being inclusive than by perpetuating harmful stereotypes anyway. But again, no one's going to notice that you said flight attendant instead of stewardess, right? Right. Or that you just said boss instead of boss babe.
Yeah.
Or mompreneur or whatever.
No, I think that's really great. And that is like you said, it's sort of it's not a new challenge. It should not have been a new challenge that we face. But it is, right? It's in our contemporary communication world. That is absolutely something that we need to consider and be as, again, for me, it comes down to accessibility and equity. Like, how do we give people good representation? How do we tell stories in a way that we're sort of honoring the people we're talking about as to the best of our ability? Yeah, and that's a challenge.
Absolutely. And it's even like, in Oak Cliff, anytime Oak Cliff gets coverage, it's because a shooting happened, right? It's even just like going in and talking to the community of Oak Cliff and highlighting their community in a positive way instead of a negative way. Or, I even talked about how most of the time, if you're talking about crime and welfare, news is going to include photos of Black individuals rather than white, even though in real life, crime from white individuals is substantially higher. And the same way as with welfare, the majority is white people getting on welfare. And the same is like, as we all know, when we're talking about immigration, majority photos associated is the Mexican American community, right?
Yeah.
When we all know that immigrants are from everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So it's just, there's just this really big disconnect and this much more like substantial portrayal that is just like inaccurate when it comes to these types of stereotypes.
It's really interesting. That's really interesting. And it's a good thing to think about in terms of climate communication as well and environmental communication, which is, I feel like just, and you've talked about it a little bit, but that seems to be where your passions sort of lie in telling a good climate story and in encouraging more sort of environmental ethic in people. So I've got a couple of questions in relation to that.
Absolutely.
Okay. So the first is, how have you, like, we live in a culture, and you mentioned this earlier, where like talking about environmentalism and climate change and everything sort of wrapped up in this whole conversation with the green industry in general is polarizing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's challenging to discuss in a, again, sort of positive and sort of collaborative way.
Mm-hmm.
How, and I'm not sure I even know the right way to completely ask this question, but how have you found success? Because again, you are a very successful climate writer and very successful environmental writer. Have you found success in maybe balancing some of the hard truths that are wrapped up in this, and communicating to people that maybe don't want to hear those truths?
Yeah, so this is really funny because this is what my thesis was on. And once I did my surveys and interviews, I found out that no one actually was aligning with my interpretation of journalism, because I thought in a way that advocacy is acceptable in climate journalism, or like non-objectivity, right? Because you're not presenting both sides in environmental journalism or climate journalism. Like there is one side, but because it is an inherently science-based issue and not political issue, no climate journalist actually thinks that they're being advocates for the environment, because they're like, we're not reporting it any differently than we would crime or child abuse. Like, right, there's no argument that child abuse is bad or crime is bad.
Right.
But we don't have that same perception for climate change, right? So that's why, I surveyed journalists from across the nation, right, for my thesis. And they were like, we're not being advocates. We're just telling the facts, like using scientists as sources, right? And for me, being in Texas, and you'll agree with this, I'm sure, merely even mentioning the word climate change in our stories is advocacy, on as far as the beliefs of our audience, right?
Yes.
Like they are thinking that we are shoving political propaganda down their face.
Yes.
But everybody across the nation does not see that. So I'm like, wait, this is a geopolitical thing. This was my own interpretation or my own perception because of my location, which I came to learn. And then I also came to learn that most climate journalists or environmental journalists are non-environmental journalists because they are passionate about the environment. I am, because I'm passionate about the environment.
Yeah.
This is no more personal to them than covering the crime beat or education beat. Like, this is just where they are.
It's just what they do.
Yeah, it's their jobs. Like, they don't see it as advocacy. They don't see we got into the conversations of advocacy and objectivity. And I even have an entire part in my thesis about how the lost meaning of objectivity. The idea of objectivity came around in the 1920s after, I think it was Walter Lippmann. He decided that there were too many inexperienced journalists covering Russian Revolution or Russian War, something along those lines.
Okay.
Russia and war, whatever the technicality of it was. And he came up with a process, said that journalists needed to be taught a way to go through this verification process. So the idea of objectivity is actually just supporting your research and sources and attributing, not completely keeping your own, doing this to prevent your own biases from entering in. But nowadays, some people think I even had one source tell me that they were required with the Associated Press 20 years ago to register as an independent voter. So some people think, some people think you can't even go as far as voting as a journalist because it might be, someone could see you standing in line of primaries, either a Democrat or a Republican, or they can, that's public record which party you vote for in primaries. So they just think you can't vote on these issues sometimes. And that wasn't even the original intention. The original intention was the process of doing it, not your own personal opinions. Pure objectivity is never it's not possible.
No,
We're
it's not.
humans. We all have opinions. And, even by choosing your sources, by even selecting a topic, that's already not objective because there's a reason you chose this topic instead of another, right?
Yeah.
So that's my spiel. As far you asked about balance.
Yeah.
Right? It's a tough one as both an agriculture and an environmental reporter, right? You gotta, I'm talking to two separate sides of the spectrum right here. So I like to talk about how inevitably, when I'm talking about agriculture, you gotta put in the climate change issue in there because we're facing more and more drought. And I actually haven't had a lot of like pushback from that
No,
from
right.
any readers, which I was really surprised by. Some do say, we experienced drought in the 80s, and climate change has been around that long. Like the planet has been around a lot longer. Like it's obviously gotten a lot warmer in recent years. So, but I mean, okay, fine. I guess that's how our climate is now. But if you look at how long our world's been around, then you'll see that, this is an issue just in recent years. So it's definitely a balance. But you'll learn that when you talk about, especially on the agriculture side, like saying, hey, you got to present it in like an economic way when talking about the agriculture side, right? And I like to cover, mainly wildlife when I'm talking about the environmental side or water and stuff. And it's like inarguably bad by pretty much anyone that extinction, is bad.
Yeah, not great. Yeah.
And that, not having a water supply is
less than ideal.
Yeah,
for sure.
Exactly. People can't argue that. So it's just, it's knowing your audience. That's the biggest thing. Knowing your community and how they perceive. You got to meet your community there. Yeah. And I think like I always, was telling some of my sources for my thesis, like it's a lot different at the New York Times. Like if they even wanted to like blatantly editorialize on climate change, they could get away with that because the people coming to read the New York Times climate section are either climate enthusiasts who want to read about it or people who just want to argue, right?
Go pick a fight, right?
It's not that you're just like average farmer, right? Just trying to read a story and learn what's happening within your community.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And I really like the discussion on objectivity and the intents of objectivity and what we portray it as. Because I think about the scientific process and how we develop science and research and all of that. And we do have, so there is, and I really like what you said about how there is inherent and necessary bias in everything we do, right? When I design a study, I'm going to use my own biases. I'm going to frame the way that I evaluate information through the lens of my experiences, through the lens of my education and everything else. And that contextualizes the way we do research, right? I'm going to pick my research subjects. I'm going to pick my methodology, all of that based on, yes, what's been done in the science, but also based on my own experiences. And we go through the scientific process to take some of that bias out. Like we test and we retest and we try to achieve objectivity. I had never thought about it in those same terms with writing and with journalism, that your biases exist. And they have to. Like you can't divorce those things, and I don't think we should. So that's that. I don't know. That kind of has my brain spinning. It's really interesting just on talking about the way that we approach objective writing. And I think the way as readers, we should think about the things we read. That no, this is objective in the sense that it's using good data. It's using good information. The sources are valid. Not does this writer have their own opinions? Because of course they do.
Right. Yeah.
Of course they do.
Absolutely. So my favorite quote that I actually included in my literature review said, objectivity or fairness often proves frustrating because why should I go ask someone why they don't believe in global warming when 99.9% of scientists say it's real, right?
Yeah.
Like you shouldn't have to go do that. Like objectivity in the process of journalism, as you said, should be choosing, non-biased sources, right? Experts. It should translate in the research you do and the data you use and the experts you use. Like, scientists aren't coming in biased about climate change. They're coming in because of the data, right? Because of the document, what they're seeing in their methodology, right? It's not their own political opinions here that they're forming. Like that's their entire job is to come out and get the data. Like it's not because they went out and said, hey, I want to make up this climate crisis, right?
Yeah.
It's the data that's showing it. And so that to me is especially what objectivity and environmental journalism is just using those sources who can support that.
Yeah, I'm glad we had this conversation because that is an important conversation that is not had. I'm sure this is discussed in the field of journalism, right? I'm sure this is part of what y'all think about, but like from a public perspective, like I've never heard this discussed as someone who reads a lot. Like we don't have this conversation. And I think a lot of the contention that we've started to see between the quote unquote the media, whatever that means, and the people who are just out here doing the thing comes from this disconnect of thinking that these people are trying to push an agenda, but that's not it. That you know, and there are people that do that, and that's fine. You know, that is what it is. But
there are,
and that is what it is.
Yeah.
But like the whole concept of objectivity to me is really fascinating, and I'm going to move on because I don't want to just beat this point,
absolutely.
but I think it is very important, and I'm glad that came up. So that's really cool.
Well,
I'll think about this all week.
The thing is, like, why would we intentionally do something that would cost us our jobs?
Right.
Like, you get what I'm saying? Like, to me, you know, I was worried about, like, even back in the day, like, you know, just supporting any type of, like, Black Lives Matter movement as a journalist. And one of my colleagues was like, civil rights is not a political opinion. Like, it is civil rights, right? Like, just like climate change. Climate change is not a political opinion. It is a science-based fact, right? And not only that, but it is inevitably going to impact us all. So we should be talking. It has already impacted us all.
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely.
So we should be focusing on this, right? It's not, you know, I don't care what side of the political party you're on. Like, if, you know, climate change is impacting you, like climate change is impacting us all. And I don't want to see, you know, the world without humans.
Yeah.
Well, I won't see the world without humans.
Right.
You know, like I listened to Catherine Hayhoe's message at South by Southwest, and she said, this isn't a matter of your, you know, she summarized, it's not a matter of your political opinion, your religion, or whatever. It's a matter of the planet, and the planet's always going to go on. It's just not, we're not going to be here.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's what I care about, and that's what I want to stress with people. Like, I try not to specifically put blame on specific corporations. I try not to put opinions regarding specific policies. I don't like doing that because at that point, that is not objective anymore.
Sure.
But I will go out and, you know, I'll point out, you know, in private conversations, like, okay, these people that are like literally profiting off climate change, like, who are they going to profit off of when we're all dead? You know, seriously, like, I don't think they quite realize that. And I think that's why there's like kind of this shift now, like they're slowly transitioning, like just enough to like keep us alive, right? Like keep us alive. But also now they're being able to profit off of cleaner energy and whatnot.
Sure. No, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. I don't want to wrap up without giving you a chance to talk about your podcast. Because you have just started this up. You've got 2 episodes out? 1 episode
I got the trailer in 1 episode.
In 1 episode out. Okay. So tell me how this came about. Tell me like the idea for it and just like give me the spiel about your podcast.
Okay, so this is so funny. Because my friend just messaged me. Okay, I'm the agriculture environmental reporter. Most of the time, when my friends tag me and stuff like that they think is newsworthy, I don't even respond because it's not my job. Like my job is at like agriculture and environmental news. That's my job, right?
Yeah.
But it's pretty heavy these days, right? Because of drought and whatnot.
Yeah.
And so I'm sitting here and I'm just like, okay, whatever. Most of the time I just ignore my friends. But one guy messaged me and was like, hey, I'm driving to Dallas or wherever he was driving. And every time we pass Noodle Dome Road, we wonder how it got its name. And I'm like, okay, you know, cool. And so I'm like, I'm going to look this up. And it's basically, I don't know, I can't remember what language, but it signifies, the translation of whatever it originally came from signifies dry creek. That's what it meant, dry creek. It's right on the outskirts of Merkel, I believe.
Yeah, I know where that is.
So you do. Yep. Okay, so then I talked to my editor and I was like, you know what? There's a lot of weird names around here in West Texas. Like, there's a lot of stories like how, you know, Levelland, Plainview, Littlefield, Brownfield, we could all assume how they got their names, but I still think it's cool that they have those names. And I was like, you know, this is really weird. Like, I should do a whole thing on this. And I was like, wait, no, I'm going to do all the weird things in West Texas. Like, West Texas is a weird place. Marfa lights, Lubbock lights. Like, why do we have 10 Cadillacs burying their nose into the ground? Like, you know, like, what in the world? Like, why do we toss tortillas? Like, all this stuff is just really weird.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, okay, I'm gonna start a column. Like this is my little happy project while I'm covering drought, right? And extinction. Like you gotta have that like getaway from just heavy, hard topics. And this was mine. And then people perceived it really well. Like these are my best stories for the AJ, honestly. Like just because people, and I say it in my trailer. If you know anything about West Texans, they're passionate about one thing, not one thing, but they're most passionate about one thing. And it's West Texas.
Yeah.
Like
that's the truth.
Like you West Texas is the best Texas. You know, West Texas women are the best Texas women. Like Sarah Self Wahlberg has that shirt, right? Mm-hmm. West Texas sunrise are the best in the whole world, you know, like stuff like that. People are really passionate about West Texas.
Yeah.
It's all West Texas, you know, like that whole hashtag that it's all West Texas. You know, they even had that billboard in Houston that said Houston's West Texas. And everyone was like, don't go to tech. They don't even know basic geography. And then like everybody on Twitter slammed this guy and was like, dude, get with the program.
Yeah.
And he was like, he even apologized. He was like, I did not realize. So I was like, okay, West Texans, they love hearing about West Texas. They love bragging about their place.
Yep. Yeah, we do.
So that's honestly where it came from. Was I just wanted to serve my community, and I just wanted them to learn new and interesting facts about their town, you know, their home. And I got so much positive feedback that I was, you know, some of the like theories I got, some of the emails I got were so funny that I couldn't help but not to like read them aloud to people, or at least write another story. But I thought it would be more engaging to read out loud these emails. Like my favorite one about the tortilla toss tradition was the guy who said it's whenever Tech was beating UT and A&M, and that we start, you know, A&M and Tech or Texas started comparing their degrees, and they said that the this guy said the tortilla toss tradition came because you know, either Texas or A&M said that Tech would graduate the most Taco Bell managers. I thought that was hilarious. Wow. I was like, that is really funny. Yeah. Okay. So, you know, it was like some of those comments that I had to be like, I'm going to read this aloud. Like, I think people would love it. Yeah. And they do love it. Like, you know, my podcast isn't super established yet, but it's gotten enough attention that I feel really like proud of it. I feel like it's going to be even bigger. Right. And you know what? I'm trying not to oversaturate the market. So I'm doing it once a month, talking about all the topics I covered each week. So I plan on this one happening, but I can't be for sure that these will be my topics. But I do plan on like my second episode, including so obviously the Chilton story, because that didn't make my last one, how the Chilton came about in Lubbock. I wanted to also include how a small West Texas town became the jack-o'-lantern capital of the world.
Okay.
Yeah, it's weird, right? Like data, like they just started farming pumpkins, and now like anytime you get a jack-o'-lantern around here, it's going to be from Muleshoe, Floydada, or Clovis, right? Yeah. And then why there are so many underground tunnels in Lubbock? Underneath Tech, underneath downtown. Yeah, right. Underneath Lubbock High, like so many around here. And then the Black-Eyed Children in Abilene. Yeah. Are you familiar with them?
Yeah, I know this story. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's super weird. Like, they're super weird. Eventually, I'll hit Lubbock Lights. I'll hit Marfa Lights. I'll hit, cool. You know, just a bunch of different weird things in West Texas.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think, I'm trying to think when this episode will come out. I bet it's right around the same time your second episode comes out. So I hope everyone listening goes and checks that out, because it's really a good show. I enjoyed episode 1. It was a lot of fun, and I'm really excited to hear where it goes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
So as we wrap up, the question I ask all my guests at the end of every episode is, if you had like one piece of advice for people, like if from this whole hour we've been talking, if there was something that you would like to leave our listeners with, whether it's about life or journalism or really anything, what would that be?
I honestly would just say to explore your passions and be graceful, or not graceful, but just, I guess, graceful. Be graceful with yourself, right? Give yourself grace.
Yeah.
You know, like I said, I literally, I didn't share this part of my story, but when I found out I was having a baby girl, I went out there and I tweeted, hey, I'm leaving my job. I need freelancing in DFW. Yeah. And that's how my editor with the Dallas Morning News reached out to me, because I tweeted about it.
Yeah.
I let the universe carry you. That's my biggest thing.
Yeah.
I had no clue what I was doing. I just knew that I wanted to be with my baby, and I didn't want to work full time. I didn't want to be away from her 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
And I knew that the universe would take care of me, right? So that's just one thing. Give yourself grace. Things might not always line up as you want them to. I'm sure you know that.
Oh, sure.
I've been there where, I've missed out on things that I really, really wanted, but the universe always brought me something better.
Mm-hmm.
So explore your passions. Don't give up. If this is really what you want to do not give up on your passions, because if you put enough hard work in, if you trust the universe to, help you out there, you're going to get where you want. A lot of people say that it's luck. No, it's really not luck. Like, at the end of the day, it does take hard work, and it does take belief in yourself.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great advice. Brandi, where can people find you? I know you're all over the place.
Yeah. So I have a Facebook page for my journalism called Brandi D. Addison News. Twitter, Brandi D. Addison. Instagram, Brandi D. Addison News. And then, of course, my podcast, Weird West Texas, the podcast, is available on Omni Studio, Spotify, and Apple.
Awesome. Well, that was a fascinating conversation. I so much appreciate it. Thanks for taking your time to come in and talk to me. It was a lot of fun.
And thank you for having me. I love that our friendship flourished just because I came across your podcast one day and I called you, and I never thought I'd meet you in person. I never thought I'd be living back in West Texas, and nearly 2 years later, I think, here we are. So I'm really happy that I'm now on this podcast.
Very cool. Well, thanks. I hope you have a great rest of your spring. And I hope the rest of your class goes well.
Thank you.
Oh, also, and good luck on your finishing your thesis, because that's,
I'm ready to walk the stage at Radio City, so I'm ready.
Y'all, I hope you'll take Brandi's advice and keep believing in yourself and keep putting in the work to pursue your passions and to make the things that you want to come true. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks to Brandi for being a part of the show and just for her wisdom and expertise in good storytelling. Thanks again to the Texas Tech Department of Plant and Soil Science and the Davis College for the support. But again, thank you most of all for making the show what it is, for keeping me going, and for hanging in there over the last 100 and whatever episodes. Officially, the official episode 100 is coming up in a few weeks, and I'm going to plan something special for that. It's like a birthday, like a 100th birthday or something. Anyway, I love you folks. I hope you're well. I hope you're staying safe. You know that I think the world of you. Keep being really cool plant people. Keep being kind to one another. If you have not at this point been kind to one another, maybe give that a shot. I think that's a good way to be. Y'all are awesome, and we will talk again real soon.